Hi, I'm Grace.
And I'm Rhea. We created a tutorial for an array list, specifically an array list of objects. To begin, an array is a data structure with a collection of elements which have specific indexes.
So, to differentiate between an array and an array list, an array has a fixed length in Java. However, an array list, which is a data structure only used in Java, works by creating many objects in the same class or subclass, then adding those objects to a list and then storing that list in an array. Thus, as the list changes, the size and items in an array change too.
The benefit of storing objects in an array is that it is much more concise and convenient. Typically, arrays would only allow the storage of one data type, say integer. But with an object array, one can store a number of objects in the same array with a number of properties in the form of variables. These variables do not necessarily need to be of the same data type. One thing to note is that the objects must be of the same class or subclass in order for them to be stored in an array list.
For our tutorial, we chose to simulate a pet shop with different species of animals. We stored the animal objects inside an array list, along with a number of different characteristics, including gender, breed, and species as strings, and age as an integer. To demonstrate searching through an array list, we used loops to iterate over every object.
To begin the simulation, we began by writing a function that creates an array list. We started with a loop that repeats n number of times, where n is the number of pets in the pet shop. Each time it generates a new pet called newPet in the pet class. This can be manipulated by the user. Inside the for loop, there are 4 characteristics that need to be customized: species, breed, age, and gender. First, species. We isolated 3 species: dog, cat, and fish. To begin, we began by generating a random number between 0 and 2, giving a possibility of 3 numbers. With each number, 0, 1, and 2, is an associated species, giving it an equal chance for each species. Second, breed. This goes inside each species loop, as it is customized to the species. We did 3 breeds of species using similar logic as we used for the species. Third, gender. We initialized gender to male and then generated a random number between 0 and 1. And then if the number was 1, we reset the variable to female. And then finally, age. This is just generating a random number. Finally, the objects are added to the list, which ultimately creates an array of all the pets.
For example, one of the program outputs was searching for the youngest and the oldest animal inside the pet shop. We originally set age as an attribute of one of the pet objects. Therefore, by creating a for loop starting from 0, iterating through the length of the array list, we can search through all of the pets. It is important to note that indexes for arrays and array lists start from 0, not 1. So if we wanted to retrieve the information of the second pet in the store, we would have to use pet list, which is the collection of the pets in our shop, .get1 instead of petlist.get2. Other examples of searching through array lists that we used in this program were finding all pets of a specific species or breed and outputting their names and locations. Similar to searching for the youngest pet, we used a for loop to iterate throughout all of the pets in our shop. If the species of the pet matched our desired species, we outputted the name of the object and the current index of the object, giving us the location.
So now let's do a quick demonstration of the simulation. So if I reset and then I click run. So this terminal window first pops up and the bottom 3 rows shows the data that came just with this run. The previous lines are from other times that we ran the simulation. So first you'll see that you see the youngest and the oldest pet, and then we customized the desired species to fish, so that's why it tells you which species are fish. So it's kind of a way of sorting through and filtering certain conditions using an array list. The way we kind of limited the amount of pets that are created at once is by creating a condition. So we created a variable that's count, and that counts the number of times the act button runs when you press the run button. And so we started with count at 0, and then we said if it's equal to anything greater than 0, don't create the pet. So don't call this function and run it. So that way we only created all the pets once, but all the rest of the stuff still happens. So now let's take a look at the code specifically. Majority of the code is in my world, so you have the typical function that sets the parameters of the world, and then the act function. This is a line of code that limits the creation of the pets. So here's all the sorting. First you can see we have some variables created for the min and the max age, and then the names of those pets. And so you can see that we used for loops to do the sorting, then it sifts through, and then whichever objects in the array actually satisfy that condition will be displayed in the terminal window, as you saw when we ran the simulation. To actually get the words to appear in the terminal window, we use system.out.println, and then we just used a bunch of conditionals to actually check those conditions. So this is the function that creates the pet list. It starts with that for loop that repeats the number of times as the number of pets that you want, and then it uses the same kind of logic that I described earlier, where you just generate a bunch of random numbers, and based on that you set a breed, species, age, and gender. So this createDog function is also called in the creation of the species, and basically it just generates the actual actor inside the world so that you can see it on the screen. So this is the code for the pet class. So the first thing we do is define all the variables that belong to each pet, and therefore when we define them, we're defining the variables of the pet. So you'll see we do like new pet dot, for example, age, when we are trying to define a parameter for the pet itself. And then we have a bunch of functions that just return each value for the pet so that they can be called in the myWorld code when sifting through and sorting to come up with either like the youngest pet, the oldest pet, something like that.
So we hope this tutorial gave you good insight about array lists, specifically array lists with objects. Thank you for listening.